Jetzt funktioniert schon alles. Gut. Ja, dann kann ich ja gleich an. Ja, Another Apple Sleep Experiment Part 3. Wird sicherlich interessant. Weil der letzte Part war ja schon interessant, also das hier wird auch interessant. Ja, Bella, ich bin 18 Jahre alt. Ich weiß, was ich mir anschauen tue. Ich bin weit über 18 Jahre alt. Also kann es mir eigentlich egal sein. Entschuldigung, ich bin immer noch krank. Da möchte ich ein bisschen das Husten, was eventuell kommen tut, entschuldigen. Ihr habt Audio. Man hört alles. Ich meine, das ist über eine Stunde lang. Also, eventuell sind es wirklich dann fast 2 Stunden Reaction. Wenn ich viel zu sagen habe. Und ich weiß aufgrund von Preview-Bildern, dass es hier irgendwie wahrscheinlich um Rarity und Rainbow Dash geht. Also, ja, es wird interessant.
Autumn wind beat mercilessly against Carousel Boutique. The gusts were powerful and eventually worked their way through small cracks between a window and its sill. Rarity jumped and gasped out in surprise when the pane gave way and opened to the roaring wind outside. She steadied her breath and trotted to the window to firmly press it back into frame. A voice called out from the room above the boutique and carried down to the nearly empty shop below.
What was that?
Rarity looked up at the staircase with chagrin.
Just the wind, sweetie. You can go back to sleep.
Rarity called to her sister, but received a no.
Ja, natürlich war es nur der Wind, ja, genau. Wahrscheinlich war es das wirklich nur, ja. Scheiße, dass das windig ist.
reply.
Wegen Applejack, wo man sich immer noch nicht sicher ist, ob es echt ist oder ob es nur eine Halluzination ist. Ich bin echt gespannt, wie das dann ganz am Ende aufgeklärt wird.
She bitterly wished she could be like Sweetie Belle right now, warm in bed and drifting off to a contented sleep.
Ja, das ist der Nachteil davon, wenn man erwachsen ist, glaube ich.
But Rarity's tapestries remained unfinished, so she could not afford such a luxury. Instead, Rarity clung to the anticipation of a soft pillow and a proud sense of she just hoped that Luna's moon would still be in the sky by the time it became a reality. With the wind muted, the boutique's ambience quieted to the soft hum of a sewing machine, and the rustles of fabric fed into it with precision. The 13th, and the most elaborate tapestry to date, was nearing its completion. Rarity hoped it and the many other tapestries she had created.
Aber sehr schön, dass Rarity genauso wie alle anderen von dem langen Tag gestresst ist. Wie gesagt, das ist ja eine ziemliche Gemeinsamkeit und das fällt schon auf. Also es könnte sogar tatsächlich sein, dass der Applejack tatsächlich nur eine Einbildung ist. Also ja, es ist sehr, sehr gut möglich.
In the castle, or perhaps town hall, long after commemoration's conclusion. After all, these weren't silly ice sculptures or party decorations that could be cast aside at the end of the night. These were intricate pieces of art that Ponyville could embrace year-long. The sewing machine stopped on its final stitch. Rarity carefully pulled the tapestry free from the machine, cut the excess thread, and held it aloft in her magic. She remained stone silent as she stared at the silhouetted depiction of the stallion it bore. The drive and determination to complete her task was pushed aside for darker, unwelcome thoughts. She was familiar with these thoughts and memories, and chagrined that they assault her mind now when time was a crucial factor. But, like the flow and ebb of waves crashing into a shore, There was no stopping their occasional flooding her consciousness. It was always the same memories, played out like a picture show, incessantly reminding her of the night that changed everything. A night 7 years prior. A night whose secrets she would keep until her dying breath.
Ja, ihr habt alle Scheiße gebaut. Punkt.
That night began with such hope and confidence in Rarity. After weeks of study and preparation, Twilight was finally ready with a cure. No longer would Rarity have to hear about those massacres found in that once thriving apple orchard, or about the monster that lingered there. A monster that only Twilight and her friends knew to be Applejack. They all gathered at the outskirts of Sweet Apple Acre.
Wirklich, das Ganze hat sogar Wochen gedauert, nicht nur ein paar Tage, aber so kam es jedenfalls in Apple Sleep Experiment vor, dass es innerhalb weniger Tage passiert ist. Es hat Wochen gedauert. Interessant, dass man das dadurch so gut vertuschen konnte, obwohl das Ganze ewig gedauert hat. Das hätte ja jemandem auffallen müssen, der auch überlebt hat, dass Applejack seltsam drauf ist, aber scheinbar doch nicht. Sehr interessant.
And each were given a small syringe of that mysterious remedy. Rarity recalled clutching the syringe tightly in her hoof and feeling an odd reassurance of safety and hope. Her friends all felt varying degrees of anger, fear, and betrayal, but Rarity felt conviction. If this was the cure, it meant that the fault did not lie with the pony, but with the potion. Applejack, the real Applejack, would never allow such monstrosities to occur. To Rarity, she was just an unwilling and unlucky vessel for dark magic to corrupt and possess. Applejack would be found, cured.
Ja, aber trotzdem am Ende Applejack dann ins Gefängnis stecken und tun, als ob sie gestorben wäre und das ist sehr verantwortungsvoll.
And their lives would resume with normalcy and peace. This was the delusion Rarity chose to embrace. So, boldly, Rarity ventured out into that cursed orchard. To cover more ground, it had been decided that each friend venture out on their own, though even Rarity felt trepidation at such a prospect. She recalled the eerie silence in those trees, and the uncertain fear that hung in the air. After some time wandering aimlessly, she happened upon a victim yet to be discovered. Their desiccated corpse was shriveled and dried from the intensity of the heat wave Equestria was suffering. Enough time had passed that wildlife had already picked it clean of tissue.
Ja, ich frage mich übrigens noch bis heute noch, das Ganze damit zusammenhängt, dass es Twilight gelungen ist, wieder Regen nach Equestria zu bringen. Ich frage mich ernsthaft, wie das damit zusammenhängt, weil das ganz unmittelbar ja nacheinander passiert ist.
And organs, leaving only bones and patches of colored fur behind. The shock and stench of decay brought instant tears to Rarity's eyes. She refused to investigate it further and give an identity to the poor pony victim, but made a mental note instead where to send ponies for the remains on the following day. Rarity swallowed her fear and repulsion and pressed onward. Soon after, she happened on a second undiscovered corpse strewn about the orchard in Rarity's path. Then, a third. Seeing the gruesome death first hoof like this was weakening her resolve and corroding her sympathies. Rarity's hope wavered as dimly as the unicorn magic she used to act as her light in the darkness. Still, she forced her hooves to press onward. She knew she was getting close, and was mentally preparing for the shock of what Applejack had become, when she found the fourth butchered pony. At first glance, he was unrecognizable like the others, but the bloodied patch of fur bearing a cutie mark caught Rarity's eye. She didn't want to believe it, but her pinprick pupils landed on a torn mustache, and finally, a wide and unblinking blue eye whose hue matched perfectly with her own. There was no mistaking him now. Hondo Flanks, her father. an overwhelming sensation of 1,000 pricks of needles.
Ja, das ist nicht schön, dass das passiert ist. Ja, ja, wünscht man keinem.
Assaulted her skin, and the world around her was swaying off kilter, as if she could not find balance. Seeing some pony she loved, so brutally annihilated, had shattered her resolve and her mind. Had her legs given out? Had she passed out? Had she even screamed at all? Those memories were lost to her. All she could recall was being frozen in grief, and would remain on the orchard floor until she was discovered hours later in that harsh, hot sunlight. Rarity never spoke of that night, not even to Sweetie Belle, whom she learned after the fact had been in those very trees that same evening.
Rarity screamed out again when the same window she'd closed minutes earlier erupted into a cacophony of shattered glass. The gust of wind.
Oh ja, gut, die macht mal wieder Nachricht. Nicht Nachrichtensprecher, aber dieses tolle, was er ja auch schon so gut gemacht hat in dieser ganzen Tale of the Lost Neverwhere-Reihe. Er ist super darin, diese Art von Zeug zu machen. Wirklich. Also diese Art von Voice Acting, es ist perfekt.
She put a hoof to her chest to steady her heartbeat as she ignited her horn with magic to light the way. She walked carefully towards the window to inspect what had happened. However, her hooves came.
Abgesehen davon, dass weiter damit gemacht wird, dass verschiedenste Teile der Fanfic von verschiedenen Leuten narrated werden, das hat auch was weiterhin, das macht es auch ziemlich gut.
To an abrupt halt when she spotted what laid amongst the glass debris. It was small and old, rusted and weather-worn from exposure to the elements. A long, cloudy cylinder held what appeared to be a solidified solution inside. On one end of the cylinder was a broken metallic tip that Rarity knew had once been a long, sharp needle. On the other, a plunger that was now rusted in place and unusable. She fearfully stepped closer.
Ach ja, jemand, jetzt verstehe ich, jemand hat das Fenster mit einer Spritze eingeschmissen. Ja, ich ahne, wer es ist. Ich glaube, ich weiß, wer es ist.
Refusing to believe it could be the very syringe she'd carried all those years ago. Before she could brave it.
Wäre interessant, weil das würde nochmal unterstreichen, dass das Ganze in der Tat nicht echt ist, sondern eine Halluzination. Woher sollte Applejack genau diese Spritze herhaben? Wirklich. Es wirkt tatsächlich so, als ob das Ganze eine Halluzination ist.
Chance to pick it up, however, she could hear a voice above the wind outside.
Lose something?
That voice, the gruffness and graggle was both familiar and foreign. Rarity's eyes shut up to see a figure outside the boutique, shrouded in darkness and the haze of new rainfall. Swallowing back the lump in her throat, Rarity raced to the door of the boutique and pulled it open with her magic. She had every intention to confront the unknown assailant for what had happened to her window, but the rain pitter-pattering on the doorstep gave her pause. Getting wet was notably the least of her problems, but the instinct not to venture into it granted her some precious time to think before she acted. Was an encounter with a potential stranger in the dead of night really an intelligent pursuit? Rarity was rapidly weighing her options when the shrouded figure made their presence known and walked with a confident stride towards the door. Rarity realized she'd made a mistake and backed away quickly. She gripped the handle of the door in her magic to slam it shut, but it was too late. The intruder had jutted out their hoof to keep the door open.
Can't run away this time.
Rarity and the intruder were only a few feet from one another, but the aggressors'
Ich sag gerade, was so die ganzen Horroraspekte das Ganze angeht, das ist einfach so gut.
identity remained a mystery. The only light source at Rarity's disposal was her unicorn magic, but its meager blue tint did not offer her many helpful clues for distinction. Rain had flattened whatever style their mane and tail had been in before the
Rarity, du hast Magie, mach irgendwas damit. Mach irgendwas damit, nicht, dass noch was passiert.
storm. So all Rarity could make out was a strange, sopping wet, pony-shaped figure inching ever closer towards her.
A small inkling started to build in the back of her mind.
When she heard that deep, raspy drawl.
Goodness, it's an absolute downpour out there. Come inside, you must be drenched.
Rarity's years of putting on a professional demeanor for customers was serving her well in this terrifying ordeal. She didn't know if this pony was dangerous, or if they could be fooled, but she held firm to the facade.
Und jetzt erkenne ich, dass Applejack schon im Raum drin ist. Ich dachte, das wird irgendwie da schnell, als ob sie vor der Tür draußen wäre. Nee, sie ist tatsächlich schon im Raum drin. Ich merke jetzt, dass die Zeichnung ein bisschen dreidimensional ist. Ja, ich bin dumm. Und natürlich muss ich meine Dummheit wieder mal ansprechen.
Let me get you some towels and perhaps something soothing to drink.
She asked, looking for any excuse to distance herself from this stranger.
Why'd you let me do that, Rares?
Rarity's breath caught in her throat, and her hooves froze in place. Only one pony ever called her Rares. The only pony this couldn't possibly be, and yet...
Ja, du bist am Arsch, Rarity, du bist am Arsch.
Rarity dared to ask. She brightened her horn's glow to take in the details before her. An object barely passing for the term hat was practically in shreds as it laid limp and wet atop the pony's matted mess of a mane.
The eyes this pony had were sunken into her skull, listless and
almost devoid of color. Her skin sagged in places around her eyes that made her appear far older than she was. It didn't help that the fur itself was paler than the warm orange hue she remembered, like Applejack had been sun-bleached. Rarity glanced away from her face to take in the rest of Applejack's wrinkled, marred fur
Hi. Ich habe jemanden im Chat, lol.
and hooves. She noted that Applejack's
Geil.
fur was bulkier in
Hi.
places than she remembered, as if the elapsed time apart had been spent honing the strength
Ich glaube, der Username sagt mir sogar was, aber das ist jetzt irrelevant.
that was present in Applejack from the beginning. When she let the terrifying reality finally settle, she returned her eyes to AJ's to find a piercing gaze that was firm and bore into Rarity.
I'm waiting.
let you do what? I don't understand.
That night. You and I both know what you saw.
Applejack said, taking a step closer to Rarity. She stumbled back a few paces.
Her heart was pounding so violently.
She could feel it in her temples.
Applejack, I couldn't. I mean,
Rarity scrambled for words.
Abgesehen davon weiß Applejack überhaupt theoretisch, welche Leute sie getötet hat, weil sie kann es ja nicht wissen. Weil sie dachte ja zu an alles wird die Rich und kann ja nicht genau wissen, dass sie Rarity's Vater getötet hat, weil ich glaube, Twilight hat ja auch nie gesagt, wen sie alles getötet hat. Ich meine, Applejack ist höchstens darauf gekommen, dass sie Applebloom getötet hat, aber ansonsten, oh.
She did indeed know what Applejack was talking about, but she had denied that thought, that reality, for so long that she convinced herself it wasn't true.
I don't know what I saw. I saw my father, that's what I saw.
Applejack cocked her head to the side in confusion, like she wasn't expecting that response.
She moved again, but pushed past a
Confused and frightened Rarity.
Ja, weil Applejack wahrscheinlich eigentlich, wenn es wirklich Applejack wirklich echt wäre, dann könnte sie gar nicht wissen, dass es Rarity's Vater war, aus offenen Gründen, weil sie hätte die Leute nicht erkannt, die sie getötet hat. Das ist so die Sache.
To stand at her workstation instead, Applejack reached out with a withered hoof towards the tapestry waiting there, and stroked the fabric depiction.
By the way, this stream is in German. Nur so, ja. Aber ich glaube, ich habe jemanden Englisches im Chat. Sorry.
of Hondo flanks.
So what? You just gave up on saving me then?
No, I wanted to. I had every intention. I was just so scared, Applejack. I didn't know if you caught my case or not. I didn't want to be the next victim rotting in your family's orchard.
Rarity pleaded. Images assaulted her mind as she was unable to force back the memory.
She did see Applejack that night.
It was after the discovery of her father's corpse. She theorized later that she must have found her before Twilight or Rainbow Dash had. She could have spared her friends and her sister from what was to transpire that night. Instead, Rarity chose to remain frozen on the ground, while AJ slinked back into the darkness.
It weren't like I was coming at you. If I hadn't seen you, you could have snuck up behind me with that.
Applejack motioned to the broken glass and the old syringe beneath the windowsill. Rain was pouring in from outside, and a clap of thunder roared into the dimly lit room.
Rarity was at a loss for words. She'd had that very thought time and time again, only now it was made real by the pony she failed to cure.
You didn't by chance to see what happened to Dash? Why? What about them youngins, huh? Scootaloo. Did you see how it affected your sister?
Applejack asked. Rarity knew she was dancing around the gut punch, but that it was coming. Applejack stared Rarity down, as if she was waiting for Rarity to mention the name of the final pony present at that horrible scene. When Rarity didn't respond, Applejack's demeanor instantly changed. She took the tapestry in her bare hooves and tore at the fabric, ripping into it as easily as tearing a piece of parchment.
No! Applejack, please!
Rarity pleaded again, frantic this time and reaching out for her ruined tapestry.
What happened, Rares? What happened because you didn't cure me sooner? Tell me! I want to hear you say it!
Applejack tore into the tapestry again, but Rarity lowered the hoof she'd raised in protest. Guilt had encompassed her, and she no longer had the will to stop AJ from her destruction. Rarity took a couple of steps back, with her ears flat against her head. Eventually, she turned away completely, refusing to watch Applejack make tatters of her father's likeness.
Oh, I see. You're still lying to yourself, ain't you? You still think you're innocent.
No, I am not innocent. I know what I didn't do, and what I could have done.
Rarity snapped, bitter defeat in her.
Nicht, dass irgendjemand unschuldig in dieser Situation ist, irgendwie, aber ja. Und erneut, je häufiger, je länger man sich das anschaut, desto mehr hast du wirklich das Gefühl, dass das wahrscheinlich wirklich, dass Applejack nicht real ist, höchstwahrscheinlich.
Tone. She'd suppressed this shame for years, but knew eventually she would have to confront it. She just hadn't expected to do so like this.
Say her goddamn name, Rares.
Rarity looked up, in shock, to see Applejack standing on the other side of the room when she hadn't heard her make a single hoof step.
Okay, ich mag das Bild.
She whirled back to see the remains of her father's tapestry, before realizing Applejack wasn't...
Oh, die Maus wird mal aufgenommen. Wow. Toll, OBS. Toll.
Applejack, please. I know you're angry with me, but you don't have to do this.
Say her name!
Applejack screamed, tearing another tapestry down the center. When she did, Rarity's all-consuming guilt morphed itself into anger.
Stop it!
Rarity screamed, using her magic to rip the tapestry.
Interessant, dass Rarity scheinbar, jedenfalls sieht Rarity nie das Farbton anders aus, sie sieht jedenfalls nicht weiß aus.
From AJ's grasp, exacerbating the damage. Applejack continued her destruction, while Rarity desperately tried to stop her.
I'm not the one who took dangerous magic from Twilight. I'm not the one who didn't heed her warning.
Ja, und weiter hätte Applejack gar nicht das Zeug geben sollen. Also, ja.
I'm not the one who slaughtered pony after pony on my family's property. I'm not the one who tried to kill our friends. Apple Bloom wasn't my fault.
Applejack stopped suddenly at the mention of her sister's name. After a long pause, she looked up at Rarity with
Wurde auch langsam Zeit, dass das mal erwähnt wird, ja.
so
Besonders würde Applejack nicht, wenn sie wirklich frei wäre, nicht nach Sweet Apple Acres gehen, um zu schauen, was wirklich selber passiert ist, anstatt erstmal durch Ponyville zu gehen und Leute zu terrorisieren. Sie könnte ja theoretisch zuerst zu Sweet Apple Acres gehen, aber ja, wie gesagt, das ist alles sehr, sehr seltsam.
soulless eyes.
There now. Was that so hard?
The gathered tapestries in Applejack's hooves were then unceremoniously dropped, and she walked away from their remains. Rarity seized the opportunity and raced to protect them from further harm.
She fought back the urge
Urged
to
to sob as she gathered weeks of ruined work into her hooves. Silent tears fell onto their shreds, but they weren't shed
Oh.
with the loss of art.
Oh, hallo Sweetie Belle. Ja, das wird jetzt sicherlich nicht so schön.
No, these tears were for her returning guilt, unearthed and unyielding.
Rarity?
Rarity's head snapped up the second that Sweetie Belle spoke. Sweetie was standing at the base of the stairs.
Das hat relative Parallelen zur Sache mit Pinkie Pie, wo die Kekse irgendwann mal runtergekommen sind. Und hier bei Rarity ist es Sweetie Belle, ja, interessant.
Case,
Looking from one side of the room to the other.
taking in the sight before her.
When her eyes fell on Applejack,
She screamed in unadulterated fear and sprinted back up the steps.
something dark and evil started growing
Yay, das ist schnell eskaliert und das Schlimmste, was hätte passieren können, ist passiert.
in Applejack's sinister expression.
Rarity didn't know what it meant,
But she knew to be afraid. She
Ich muss kurz, dann kann ich jetzt abwenden. Ich hab's vergessen. So.
tried to scramble to her hooves to stop AJ from
Nur
whatever
kurz eine Kleinigkeit erledigt.
but was caught up in the tapestry's tatters.
Applejack, this is between you and me. You leave Sweetie out of this. I'm guilty, all right? It's my fault. Just
Kann es irgendwie sein, dass ich was vergessen habe? Warte kurz. Gemacht. Ich habe schon dabei bin. Ich habe einen Fehler bei der Verlinkung vom originalen Video gemacht, oder? Es kann sein. Ja, auf geht's, Sachen noch live fixen. Bin so, toll. Ja, scheinbar habe ich nicht. Sollte es aber passen, glaube ich mal.
leave her alone.
Rarity screamed, her voice cracking as she ignited her horn with magic. She levitated anything within magical reach to hover around her as makeshift weapons.
Hoping it would be enough to intimidate Applejack.
Sewing scissors, pins, bolts of fabric, needles, and even the sewing machine itself hovered around the frightened unicorn as she kept fighting to be freed from the mess of her ruined art.
You'll never understand my pain.
Applejack said coldly, her icy gaze falling on the scrambling unicorn without a hint of concern.
I lost my sister, so maybe you won't understand until you lose yours.
A frightfully similar sensation took hold of Rarity at the sound of those words. Those 1,000-needle pricks and the nauseating swaying assaulted her body as it had 7 years prior.
Es war klar, dass das kommen würde.
It was all she could do to remain upright as she watched Applejack ascend the steps after her sister like a bolt of frenzied lightning.
No, Rarity wouldn't succumb. She couldn't succumb. She'd left Sweetie Belle in danger once before.
And this was her one and only chance to rectify that mistake.
With an outcry of fear, Rarity thrust every object she'd held aloft in her magic after the fleeing Earth Pony. She didn't wait to see if any of them had had any success before building up her magic for a second blast. The resounding explosion of light and destruction eviscerated the tapestries.
Ja, irgendwie hört sich das nicht so effektiv an. Nein, wirklich nicht. Das hört sich jetzt nicht so gut geplant und effektiv an.
Held her down. There was no time to feel any regret for the loss. Distant screams urged her forward with single-minded determination.
Ich hab's doch gesagt.
She raced up the steps, 2 at a time, her tiring magic building for a third blast. She had just reached the doorway to Sweetie Belle's room when,
Applejack opened the door and slammed herself into it.
as a result, the door lambasted Rarity with enough
Forced to send her
careening down the hallway. Magic sputtered as Rarity screamed out in agony. She roughly collided headfirst into an adjacent wall. Through the cacophony of shrieking.
Ja, genau deshalb sollte man Treppen richtig hochlaufen, Rarity. Vielleicht deshalb. Und außerdem ist dann alles. Ich mag übrigens das Artwork.
Dissonant tones. Rarity could have sworn she heard something crack. There was no word for the pain of it all, just a continuous and searing white-hot agony that threatened her consciousness with every passing second.
Still, Rarity refused
To give in to the comfort of darkness. She couldn't fail her loved ones. Not again. Not ever again.
Applejack's screams were barely audible over Rarity's pain, but she latched onto them as an anchor in reality.
Adrenaline wouldn't pump through her veins forever, so she had to act now. Then came the sound of Sweetie Belle's garbled cries. More anchors, this time pulling her to stand again. Her legs shook, each step a renewed tidal wave of needle pricks with increasing intensity. She kept going. This was a pain she'd wish on no pony, enemy or otherwise. But she refused to relent. Her sight was greatly impaired, and her equilibrium suffered even worse. She fell flat on the ground, darkness encroaching. A single stream of blood flowed from somewhere above her eyes, coloring her vision in crimson before she swiftly wiped it away. Gritting her teeth, she crawled onward, then pushed herself up to her hooves and stumbled forward.
Es ist einfach so verdammt gut, ey. Und ich kann nicht mal sagen, warum. Es ist einfach so verdammt gut. Das passt einfach alles in diesem Moment.
The distance to
Sweetie's room was the most lengthy and languishing journey Rarity had ever experienced. Finally, the opened door was within reach. As her hoof outstretched for the handle, hoping
Und wahrscheinlich kommt Rarity zu spät.
steady herself.
Gehe ich jedenfalls von aus, eventuell ist Sweetie Belle schon am Sterben irgendwie und Applejack ist verschwunden, weil, Logik.
She caught
Würde mich
sight
nicht
of
wundern.
the scissors. They had been part of the weapons after Applejack, and in a pinch, they would serve her just fine. She attempted to ignite her horn and hold them aloft, but her magic refused to respond. Rarity let out a winded sob, gathering the scissors and hoof.
feeling of the cold, weighty metal in her grasp was almost
Identical to what it had been like that night with the syringe. The past had caught up with her at last, and her greatest mistake was played out before her again with a choice. Rarity's mind was made up. With a frenzied cry, Rarity rounded the corner into Sweetie Belle's room.
Applejack was waiting for her there, their hooves colliding together at the same moment as a crack of
Aber hey, immerhin, Sweetie Belle ist noch nicht tot, scheinbar.
roared outside. Struggled for control of the weapon in the darkness, and Rarity couldn't help but notice the absence of Sweetie Belle's voice. She could only
Also ne, ist Rarity ja so. Ups.
hope by the princess's grace that Sweetie was unconscious, but all right. With each agonizing second, Rarity's strength waned. She was losing the fight, and she knew it. In a fit of hysteria, she pulled away from Applejack, allowing her to keep the sewing scissors. However, Rarity thrust out her hoof when Applejack attempted to take a step. Much to her surprise, AJ's footing caught hold, and it sent the earth pony barreling to the ground. Rarity could only watch in shock through bleary vision as the scissors were propelled out of hoof and skid in Rarity's direction. This hadn't been the way she wanted it to end. There was so much left unspoken, so much still unknown. She didn't even know who was killing her now, a mare or a monster. But Rarity couldn't riddle
Oder eventuell sie selber aufgrund von Stress und Überarbeitung. Das kann auch sein, weil, wie gesagt, habe ich ja schon mal angesprochen.
out her morality. She wasn't giving herself the choice. This was a kill or be killed situation, so she was going to commit. Rarity's body screamed in pain as she forced herself up on her hind legs, the syringe held aloft. No. Not syringe, scissors.
There was a sickening sense of fall.
Ja, ich glaube, es ist eine Einbildung, weil das ist schon mal die Andeutung, dass sie nicht eine Spritze, sondern eine Schere halten tut. Das ist sehr interessant.
Forward as the blades.
And the pony wielding them thrust downward. Rarity braced herself for the impact with her victim. But the far more frightening surprise was the awkward stab hitting not pony, but floorboard.
Rarity released the scissors as her body rolled to the side, senses screaming.
Somehow, Applejack had maneuvered out of the way of the final blow.
For the time being, the world was spinning too violently for Rarity to find the right footing to stand. As each second passed, dread built in the unicorn's veins. She could only will her body on for so long before it would refuse to respond, and she was dancing around that last shred of consciousness.
Somewhere in her stupor, Rarity's ears twitched to the sound of thundering hoofsteps descending the stairs, followed by the sound of the door opening and slamming shut again. Applejack hadn't remained to finish her off, as she had expected.
Vielleicht, weil Applejack gar nicht mal da war. Also die Zeichen sind ziemlich offensichtlich, finde ich. Aber wie gesagt, ich muss abwarten, bis Part 4 raus ist.
She tried again to ignite her flame, and this time magic increased to a dull light. Even just the act of turning her head to the side sent waves of piercing pain through Rarity. By some stroke of luck, she found what she was looking for right away. Sweetie Belle.
Rarity gasped out in relief to find her sister so nearby.
However, Rarity beheld the horror of her little sister's face, and that relief vanished. Sweetie Belle's mouth hung open slightly. Blood pooled from unseen.
Ich hab's doch gesagt, dass Rarity den Sweetie Belle entweder am Sterben oder tot finden würde, und ich hatte recht.
Damage within.
Es war klar.
It leaked onto the floorboards and soaked her purple and pink mane. All Rarity could see was frozen fear in those damp, milky, and lifeless eyes. She whimpered, her horn's magic extinguishing on its own, sparing her from seeing more of what had become of her baby sister. There she was again, frozen in fear and grief on the
Außerdem brennt scheinbar was, weil es hört sich soundtechnisch so an. Brennt wieder mal irgendwas.
while the remains of her family rotted away beside
Würde mich nicht mal wundern.
her. This time, however, Rarity didn't get to see the stars or feel a night wind blow. She had to mire in the smell of fresh blood and viscera, unseen but potent. Darkness was the only mercy left to Rarity, but even that lasted only for so long. A great flash of lightning from outside the boutique lit the room, and it was then that Rarity beheld what atrocity.
Applejack had left behind.
The acrid smells in the room weren't just coming from the corpse beside her, but from the very walls and ceiling. For even in that second of light, Rarity could see something scrawled over and over with her dear sister's blood. The red of it was still oozing and dripping freely, making it sound as if the rain outside had leaked into the room. Another flash as Rarity's eyes beheld
The final judgment that Applejack had laid on Rarity for her crimes.
guilty, guilty, hoof-written and frantic, and found all over the walls, the ceiling, the canopy bed, the fixtures, and some furniture. Rarity didn't have the strength to make a single sound.
Das hat was. Das hat wirklich was. Vor allem, dass da wirklich jetzt überall Guilty dran stehen tut. Das hat was, wirklich.
At this macabre
Weil es wahrscheinlich ist Rarity mehr schuld an Sweetie Belle's Tod auch in der Situation jetzt, als sie denken tut.
sight. She couldn't even properly comprehend it, now that the sharp pains, once kept at bay by adrenaline, came roaring into focus. Rarity's heartbeats echoed the sentiment she now felt for her sister's untimely demise. Guilty, guilty, guilty.
Guilty. Thunder clapped and the lightning split the sky, but Cloudsdale's Cloudaceum was unfazed and untouched above the sea. The massive cloud structure was never
Ich frage mich übrigens, by the way, wie Applejack dann nach Cloudsdale kommt. Und weil sie kann ja ohne Magie, kann sie ja nicht auf Wolken laufen.
truly in the
Entweder das oder es gibt einen Wolkenlauftrank, den sie gesoffen hat, wann sie bei Twilight war. Wie gesagt, es ist wirklich fraglich, ob das Ganze wirklich real ist.
same place twice, as it floated freely above Equestria. It was the largest active Pegasi arena and the official home of the Wonderbolts, hosting their many races and airshow spectaculars. However, that was during the day, and at the present hour, it was long past Celestia's sunset. Soren, the Wonderbolt's commander, was resting on a small section of the Cloudoceum's base cloud and reflecting on how unpleasant the place seemed when it was empty. He had grown accustomed to the sound.
Das haben Orte so an sich, wenn sie in der Nacht verlassen sind, wo eigentlich viele Menschen oder so sich aufhalten tun. Das hat schon was, ja.
Sounds of the cheering crowd, or even the barked orders of his team captain. So it felt eerie to be absent from both. Even the sound of the rainfall beneath him couldn't shake the uncomfortable silence as he waited out the storm. Cloudsdale would never admit it, but they had been struggling since the infamous drought 7 years ago to precisely regulate the weather. Planning and preparing for rain used to be simple and easily scheduled, but even with the most precise timing and ingredients, weather machines seemed to have
Ich frage mich sowieso, warum Equestria überhaupt dieses Dürreproblem hatte, wenn ihr Wette zu 100% Pegasi gemacht ist und man theoretisch zu jedem Zeitpunkt es regnen lassen kann, aber ja, wahrscheinlich macht man sich da mal wieder zu viele Gedanken.
minds of their own from time to time. Even so, Soren hadn't thought much of staying a little late at the Cloudoceum that night until he heard the clap of thunder that started it all. He internally kicked himself for fussing over their commemoration performance gear, rather than return home like the other bolts. He wasn't sure who to be more upset with, the weather workers who promised the storm would strike after the memorial, or the new recruit who had forced him and their teammates to endure a grueling...
Aber was für eine Ironie, dass es genau nach dem Memorial für dieses Event so gesehen, während das in die Dürre gab, es danach regnen soll. Sehr interessant und ironischerweise auch.
...practice with her exceptionally high standards. Either way, he was stuck. He could technically fly through the rain, as he had many times before, but his limbs and wings ached from the laborious day. He decided that fighting the wind, water, and lightning wasn't in his best interests, especially before a big performance. As he waited, Soren reflected on the destructive nature of the storm. He winced at the thought of all those perfectly placed outdoor commemoration decorations ruined by the torrential downpour. But as time wore on, Soren's eyes grew increasingly heavy, and his head slowly sank towards the fluffy cloud that held him. Before sleep took him, however, something swiftly broke through the layer of storm clouds and brought with them a gust of icy cold wind. Soren out from the sudden on.
Ich glaube, das scheiß Facebook schickt irgendwelche Nachrichten auf dem Handy, obwohl ich fucking Facebook seit Jahren nicht nutze, aber egal.
Of liquid spraying his coat and wings.
Soren, what are you still doing here?
The source of
Was machst du hier noch, Rainbow Dash?
that gust, Rainbow Dash,
Ich frag mich echt, wer Applejack in fucking Cloudsdale auftauchen soll. Ich frag mich das.
asked in surprise.
Me? What are you doing here, Crash?
Soren snapped back, using the nickname he knew she hated.
I left something in my locker. Not that it's any of your business.
Dash replied curtly, her eyes narrowing in disdain. She could usually take a ribbing from the other bolts, but Soren was toying with her last nerve.
If I wanted to get soaked, I'd just fly through this damn storm.
Soren remarked bitterly, shaking the feathers in his wings to remove any lingering moisture.
Und ja, wieder Artwork-Zeug, was ich mag. Ey, es ist allgemein alles gut, aber einige davon, wie das hier, ist einfach verdammt gut.
Afraid of a little rain, huh?
I'm not stupid enough to race lightning bolts like some ponies.
And if I were, I'd win that race too. What was our final race time earlier? Oh yeah, 15 whole seconds ahead of you, wasn't it? Guess you better hope that Spitfire isn't...
Ja, Rainbow Dash, du bist schnell. Ja, du bist schneller als alle anderen. Ja, schön. Können wir weiter mal zum Wichtigen kommen?
looking for a new commander after that kind of defeat.
Rainbow chuffed. If Soren was going to open the floodgates for a verbal sparring, rubbing today's defeat in his face would be a perfect counter to that ridiculous nickname. Dash didn't ask at the time, but she wondered now if defeating every single Wonderbolt in a one-on-one race on the same day was some kind of record. She knew that kind of defeat might put some of the bolts in a foul
Ja, Rainbow Dash, du kannst gut fliegen, du bist toll. Ich hab's kapiert.
disposition, but it was worth it.
I don't want to hear it, Crash. You trolled us for hours over the routine. So it's not exactly a feat to beat us in a stupid race afterwards.
A stupid race. Try 9.
Außerdem ist mir bei der Stelle, warum ich auf die Credits dieser Folge gespannt bin, aus Gründen.
Stupid races. Practice couldn't have been that bad if I was still kicking ass. Can't help if you're that out of shape.
Soren gritted his teeth and sucked in a deep, shaky breath. It took every ounce of restraint not to start shouting in exasperation and fatigue. Dash wasn't normally this grating, but for some reason, today she was quickly eroding his resolve. Soren's only saving grace was the ebbing of the storm beneath him. After some silence, Dash continued.
I bet I could do it again. Right now. Even after helping Twilight with that pointless list.
You know what? You're on. I don't give a fuck if it exhausts you for tomorrow. You need to be reminded of your goddamn place.
Soren asserted, spreading his wings in preparation. He had been resting for a better part of an hour now, and was confident that he could finally shut Rainbow up with a well-deserved defeat.
3 laps around the Cloudaseum. The entry arch is the finish line.
Rainbow Dash didn't argue, her brow furrowing as a smug smile spread on her lips.
3, 2, 1, go!
She screamed in rapid succession, taking off like a rocket and leaving a streak of rainbow bubbles. She could hear Soren shout something in response, but was too focused on the race to pay attention. The cold night air
Ja, das ist sehr lol. Das ist lustig.
Neck pace, chilling every inch of her fur. Its icy grip felt as if it penetrated
Aber hey, ja, etwas, was gesehen hat, ist eine verdammt ernste Story. Sehr schön.
her very bones, adding to the intense fatigue that she fought to keep at bay. Despite her body's warning signs, Rainbow gritted her teeth, refusing to believe that her ego had written a check that her body couldn't cash. She was so focused on victory, in fact, that she didn't notice the storm clouds dissipating beneath her until they were almost completely dissolved. When she was sure her lead on Soren was secure, Dash's attention shifted to assess her surroundings. It was something she did subconsciously when she flew. Something sour permeated on Dash's tongue as she took in the realization that a heavy mass of trees was directly beneath them. She hadn't given much thought to the exact location of the Cloudaseum that evening, especially since the storm had previously
Das ist Sweet Play, Chris, und außerdem sehr interessant diese Szene hier.
kept her
Auch wenn
wary.
das hier einfach nur Vektorgrafiken sind, die auf irgendeinen Hintergrund geklatscht worden sind, aber ja, es funktioniert.
Clouds obscured. Now, though, a slight fear was trickling up her spine and threatening to ruin her concentration. Could these be the very trees she
Ist los gerade für ein paar Sekunden in Applejacks Stimme abgerutscht. Nur so am Rande hat sich jedenfalls so angehört.
had
Passt ja auch.
avoided all these years? Could she be
Ja, es ist gewollt, okay. Ja, das macht's ja, das ist sehr gut.
poised just above the only place in Ponyville she vehemently refused to visit again? Rainbow's breathing quickened even more than the rigorous pounding in her chest. She tried to block the thought
Oh, und der Vektor, das bewegt sich sogar, hätte ich jetzt nicht gedacht.
that trickled around the fringes of her mind by focusing on that final lap. It was ridiculous to allow something so inconsequential to deter her from her task. After all, a mass of trees is no threat to her, not when she was soaring hundreds of feet above them. Success was inching closer and closer for Rainbow Dash. Perhaps that was why her attention veered beyond the clouds, so assured of her win that she could focus on other things. Her line of sight lingered on those trees, trying to
Dieser Moment, wenn man daran merkt, wie gut Rainbow im Fliegen eigentlich ist.
coax herself into believing they were truly inconsequential. That was when a glint of light caught her eye. It was only a glimmer amidst the dark grove, but it sent a paralyzing wave of shock through the Pegasus. She seized midair, her limbs refusing to move to her brain's commands. An abrupt halt was too sudden and too late for Rainbow Dash's racing partner to avoid, so the pair of Pegasi violently collided. Although it was enough of a shock to bring some life back to Dash's hooves and wings, the sudden confusion of entangled limbs left gravity free to pull the helpless pair
Autsch.
towards their demise below.
Na, das erklärt immerhin, wie sie Applejack wahrscheinlich begegnen dann,
Both Pegasi fought to
wenn sie nicht in Cloud-Still sind. Ja, das macht das zumindest ein bisschen logischer.
separate themselves, fighting, bucking, and screaming as they plummeted. Dash was able to get one final clean buck to Soren's chest before the pair descended into the trees. Branches reached up to rake across wings and fur,
Autsch.
ensnaring the ponies in their matted clutches. The sting of fresh wounds meshed with the choir of snapping twigs and rustled leaves. Finally, Rainbow's flailing body impacted onto the hard, unforgiving ground. She heard a series of cracks, but couldn't be sure if it had been from within or from the rain of tree debris crashing on and around her. She laid on the ground, her chest heaving as she struggled to regain her breath. Her eyes were wide and afraid, barely blinking as they surveyed the scene above her. When the rustling ebbed, she ventured to look around to see if Soren had landed nearby. Rainbow struggled to right herself, finding her limbs heavy and any movement increasingly laborious.
Soren?
She called out, her voice cracking more than usual as she fought the rising terror in her chest. Dash couldn't see much from the limited light under the cover of trees, so she flared out her wings to take off in flight. The problem was, only one wing responded. Dash could feel her heart pounding in her head as she slowly turned to find her left wing.
Besonders wahrscheinlich, weil Sweet Apple Egg Crystal jetzt dort ist, in dem Applejack aktuell gerne ist. Schon wahrscheinlich, also, das ist scheiße.
Laying limp at her side. Seeing the marred, twig-encrusted, feathered mess was bad enough, but it was what else Dash's eyes beheld amidst the debris that delivered the worst shock. They were small, red, round, and straight from her nightmares. Dash reared back, every inch of her body screaming to flee.
Soren! Where are you? Soren! Say something!
Dash demanded, her mind spiraling. She peered back up at the trees, but found only obscured shapes of leaves, fruits, and twigs against the moonlight. It was a sight she'd seen before, and aside from the damp soil beneath her hooves, everything about this place felt familiar in the worst way.
I told you, I don't want you fucking here.
Ja, ist alles nicht so schlimm.
Dash swallowed hard. That voice reverberated in her skull, dulling her senses. She squeezed her eyes shut and held her breath. No, not now. She couldn't let the nightmares have control. For a brief moment she lamented turning Twilight away all those years ago. She tried to insist that Dash speak to some pony about that night, but Dash stubbornly refused time and time again. Maybe if she hadn't, she'd have some kind of method to utilize now that would keep this phantom out of her thoughts.
Soren?
Rainbow meekly.
Weißt du, ich habe das Gefühl, man muss aufgrund dessen mir muss ich auch darüber denken, du weiter. Und ja, ist wahrscheinlich noch anfälliger darauf, eine theoretische Illusion zu haben von Applejack.
Called out again, unable to get her voice above a whisper. A gust of wind rustled the leaves around her, shaking some raindrops loose. The pitter-patter of droplets on the moist ground sounded like rocks colliding into boulders in Dash's ears. That musty scent in the air lingered in her nostrils, growing increasingly foul.
I am the inevitable, the harbinger of fear, and the messenger of truth you silence with hope.
Rainbow's hooves responded to the phantom in her mind, and she bolted in any free direction she could find. She couldn't stay. what would have been the point? Her fear was all
Ja, meine Mutter ist echt noch anfälliger für sowas. Also wirklich, wenn sie jetzt schon so Angst davor hat, ja.
already crippling her when she was
Nicht so geil.
in the air. She would be even more useless now that she was grounded. Her eyes scanned for any signs of light
Ja.
or life. As she tried
Muss ja noch schlimmer sein, dass meine Mutter aktuell nicht fliegen kann, weil ja eine Flüge so verletzt ist. Ja, das ist tatsächlich die schlimmste Situation, die hätte passieren können. Ja.
desperately to outrun her thoughts. So frenzied were her movements that she tripped and fell over an unseen object. When she hit the ground, she rolled until she came to a stop against something hard. For a long while, Dash remained disoriented, not knowing which way was up or down. When her eyes finally opened, though, she could assess that she was upright and against a tree. But her eyes fixated on the object that had caused her fall. Dash's breath went still in her chest.
Wenn das jetzt die Schaufel ist, ich schwöre, ey.
The shape sticking out of that dirt in front of her was unmistakable.
Es ist die Schaufel.
A long shaft with a metal end that pierced the ground to remain semi-upright. Though it was impossible to make out details with limited light, her mind filled in those blanks.
Sag mal, wie viel Pech muss man bitte schaffen, dass sich auf Sweet Apple Acres abstürzt und genau in dem Teil, wo das damals stattgefunden hat? Und warum hat niemand die Schaufel jemals entfernt? Das ist seltsam.
Even so, it just couldn't be possible. She destroyed that accursed shovel years ago. She'd watched it blacken and burn in that firelight, the metal spade warping from the intense heat of the blacksmith's furnace. This must have been a trick. A mirage that phantom in her memories had conjured to torment her.
That truth is that in the end, there ain't nothing at all except me.
Dash winced, covering her face with her hooves and shaking so violently she was sure she'd lose consciousness. It was all she could do, just to fight back the convulsions and gagging. Tears were freely streaming down her cheeks, until finally she pierced that silence by sobbing uncontrollably. Her garbled gasps for oxygen were the only sign that she was even still breathing. Dash gave into those years of suppressed anger, fear, and torment. She wasn't sure how long she had been inconsolable when she picked up a faint sound. Her ears swiveled behind her when she heard the movement of twigs and leaves. By Celestia's grace, Soren was alive and nearby. At least, that's what she thought
Ja, hoffentlich ist das noch nicht jemand anderes.
she heard.
Jemand, dem Bermudisch besser nicht begegnen sollte. Stattdessen hoffentlich ist es das nicht.
Rainbow Dash. That voice was low and ragged. Dash hiccuped through the sobs that refused to cease, trying to fight through that immeasurable pain to reach her friend.
Where are you?
Well, right here in the orchard, of course. Where else would I be? That voice was clearer now, no longer obscured by Dash's cries and whimpers. It wasn't quite what she was expecting, however. The voice sounded both near and far away at the same time, almost like it was carried on the wind through the trees. The tone was far removed from Soren's natural timbre, but Dash chalked it up to the spiral she was enduring mentally. The branches above her started to quake.
I can't see you. Are you hurt?
Dash responded, a little more conviction in her tone. Focusing on Soren helped keep her mind busy from the fearful frights around her. I suppose, in a way, I am hurt by what you did, or at least what you tried to do. Some part of Dash knew that pony she was conversing with now was not that same stallion she'd be groveling to for forgiveness later. Nevertheless, she carried on with the conversation without allowing her better senses to recognize the potential danger.
Can you fly? I think I popped my wing out of its socket.
Rainbow said, realizing that she hadn't moved and her eyes were squeezed shut to remain focused on the task at hoof.
Ich finde es sehr seltsam, dass bisher Remedys Part nicht mal daraus besteht, dass wir Applejack sehen, sondern dass sie einfach nur im Wald ist und Angst vor vor dem Ort hat, einfach weil es dort passiert ist. Das ist sehr interessant. Und mal eine andere Herangehensweise an das Ganze.
Rainbow's eyes popped open to pinprick pupils. As much as her brain tried to deny it, there was no mistaking that voice now. Word for word, just as in her nightmares. Rainbow
Ja.
couldn't face this. Not then, nor now. She had to escape. All hope for rescuing Soren was dashed as Rainbow leapt to her hooves and took off running again. As before, she didn't make it too far before she was thwarted. Though it was illogical, Dash witnessed limbs and trees shifting, reaching out for her and impeding her path. Their gnarled branches shot out from decayed trunks, blocking any hope of retreat. Dash didn't stop running, just changed course. To her horror, the process just kept on repeating itself until she was effectively imprisoned within the circlet of trees. Oh, we weren't done, the voice said, though it sounded far less ethereal this time. Dash whipped her head in all directions and spotted a faint pair of green eyes glaring at her from behind the fence of branches.
Ich meine, so in dem Zustand, den man da gerade ist, natürlich tut sie dann nur im Kreis laufen gefühlt und bringt nur Scheiße zusammen, einfach weil sie komplett am Arsch ist, Angst hat und dazu auch noch verletzt ist. Also, ja, perfekter geht's gar nicht mehr.
You're not real! You can't hurt me!
Dash asserted, digging her hooves into the dirt floor
Wahrscheinlich hat sie damit nicht mal so unrecht.
into a readied stance. The eyes she stared into suddenly disappeared, though, and the voice responded to Dash's left. Oh, see, that's what I liked about you, Dash. Only pony I knew without a lick of common sense. Just a whole lot of stupid. Dash found the eyes again, only to have them changed to a position on her right. The only pony who thought she could cure me. Well,
Do you honestly think there's anything left to cure, Rainbow? Do you still believe you're saving me? Shut up! Ah!
Rainbow screamed, charging at the trees where the eyes glowered into her skull. She beat against the branches between her and that taunting voice, tearing at them by mouth and hoof, like she
Ist interessant, es ist sehr interessant, bis jetzt wir Applejack noch nicht wirklich gesehen haben, außer in irgendwelchen Flashbacks von Rainbow Dash und wir haben halt die Miri gehört. Interessant ist mal auf eine andere Weise zu gehen, aber ja.
trees from the roots to make her escape. As before, the eyes disappeared, but Rainbow didn't deter from her task. If she couldn't confront that assailant, she could at least free herself. Dash's brow was thick with sweat, and she felt as if every nerve ending was alight with anxiety. Clumps of branches, twigs, leaves, and fruit were tossed over her shoulder during her frenzy. After some time, however, Rainbow felt that sickening realization take hold. She wasn't making any progress. No matter how much she tried, that underbrush never thinned. Eventually, fatigue wrapped its jaws around Rainbow, and she slumped to the ground, hyperventilating. Her breaths were so loud, in fact, that though she heard the voice again, she couldn't quite make out what it was saying. Every ounce of her being wanted to collapse then and there, but her unadulterated sheer will refused to relent. If this part of her prison was impenetrable, then she would try someplace else. Rainbow turned around and finally beheld the massive pile of debris she'd created. Her heart sank, realizing just how much she had fought through to no avail. Still, Rainbow wouldn't give up. She took a shaky step forward, choosing a different patch of gnarled fencing to try next. By the third step, Dash heard something abnormal, a shifting sound beneath the pile before her. She shook her head, rejecting the dread that followed the noise. On that fourth step, the shifting grew louder, and Dash could see movement from the corner of her eye. Morbid curiosity caused the Pegasus to pause and see what was coming for her next. Branches were weaving into one another, thickening themselves and casting off their apples and leaves in the process. The discarded leaves braided together their stems.
Ach du Scheiße, das ist ein Timberwolf.
themselves into piles.
Ja, du bist am Arsch, Adi, du bist am Arsch.
More than just snaps and crackles, but it also included wet sloshing and squelching. Then Rainbow felt the very ground at her heels begin.
Aber wie gesagt, bisher haben wir nicht Applejack gesehen, glaube ich. Obwohl, glaube ich, dieser Timberwolf so ähnlich aussieht wie Applejack. Ja, wegen dem Hut auch. Ja, das soll so sein. Mhm.
She beheld in shock a series of roots that slithered along the ground like snakes towards the amalgamation, further strengthening it. Dash wrenched herself away from the bewildering sight, deciding on a new tactic instead. She would dig her way through the muddy soil at her hooves.
Das sieht ziemlich frustriert aus.
Mud slung in every direction as the hysterical mare fought for freedom. A taunting laughter filled Dash's ears. She grunted through gritted teeth, frustrated that the mud she excavated would end up sloshing back into place. However, she didn't stop her fruitless endeavor until the shovel from earlier whizzed past her and planted itself into the muddy mound by her side. Here, try this. Dash reached for the shovel before turning to see the final conglomerated monster in the center of the orchard prison. The creature was as tall as the trees that bound Dash, though vaguely pony-like in shape. Long, twisted roots.
Es ist sehr interessant, das Ganze ist wahrscheinlich ein Timberwolf, der ähnlich aussieht, oder zumindest durch emotische Halluzination ähnlich aussieht wie Applejack. Ich gehe mal davon aus, dass es daran liegt. Aber wie gesagt, wir haben bisher noch nicht in dieser Szene noch nicht direkt Applejack gesehen und das ist irgendwie so besonders daran. Und das macht es gut. Das ist nicht das Übliche, es wäre ansonsten.
And bark made up the limbs and torso, while the leaves cascaded from the tree like a mane and tail. 6 apples adorned its wooded flanks. Perhaps eeriest of all was the eyes on the pony-shaped face. 2 sunken indents of writhing, contorting limbs wove themselves in and out of the massive hollowed sockets. When Dash lingered on the darkness within them, however, she could make out a faint image. Dash squinted her eyes, leaning forward slightly in hopes the shape would manifest itself clearer in her vision. A strange shimmer, almost like a veil of dew, was reflecting from the darkness. Within that shimmer, though, Dash watched 2 smaller ponies take form. The ponies were identical, shy and frightened little mares, clinging to their last shred of sanity. Blues came into focus, then reds, yellows, then a whole hue of the rainbow. These mares weren't real. Well, they were just reflections. Dash was watching mirrored images of herself retreating away from her and further into the dark.
Oh ja, ich sehe es jetzt auch hier im Auge, sehr interessant.
This creature wasn't just an enlarged pony timberwolf. It was a demon. At first, the thing appeared rooted to the ground, until Dash gave it the attention it wanted. The left forehoof then lifted itself, roots snapping from place, until it came back down hard, only a few inches away from its prey. Dash yelped and bolted, keeping the shovel in her tight grasp. We wanted to kill.
Woher hat sie jetzt die Schaufel erst? Ja klar, die ist dort irgendwo, aber warum hat sie so plötzlich? Und ansonsten, ja, es ist krass, wie gut das einfach ist. Es ist so verdammt gut einfach. Auch diese ganze Szene jetzt, es ist so gut. Vor allem, weil es auch mit den ganzen Szenen auf dem Aufbau her so anders ist als der Rest, als wie man es erwartet hätte. Also es ist schon was.
well, me, said he was coming from beyond the prison of trees and from that monster simultaneously. Here's your chance, Rainbow. Fix your mistake. Rainbow screamed an agitated, frightened cry as she thrusted that shovel into the thicket of branches behind her. Attacking the confinement's walls seemed a smarter bet than the monster itself. Both monster and pony roared with laughter when the shovel bounced off branch and twig, as if made from a sturdy metal and not wood. Dash knew that there would be no other way out of this hell until she faced and conquered that demon. If I wanted a fight, well, she best better give me one. With murderous intent, Dash started hacking away at the beast with shovel in hoof. To her delight, however, the monster was penetrable. Chunks of orchard debris fell off in heaps with every successful attack. The monster wasn't remaining dormant. Earth-shattering stomps were made by tremendous hooves, each one unsuccessful. The massive head lowered to ram into the small Pegasus prey, but it too would find only failure. Rainbow took great satisfaction seeing the beast ram into their wooded prison walls, and large pieces of itself snap and fall away. Even more gratifying were the outcries of anger and pain coming from that beast, as well as the voice
Warum habe ich wieder mal das Gefühl, dass das, was sich angreifen tut, nicht das ist, was sie sehen tut? Ich habe nur das Gefühl.
from beyond the confinement. As Dash whittled the monster down, her confidence and her anger only grew. As it said, she should have killed me that night. That Twilight Sparkle. She was a fool to insist otherwise, when they could clearly see the irreversible evil that I had done. It didn't matter how I got free, or how I came to be here. It didn't matter what strange magic I had invoked now. This was a gift.
Also mag ich es, dass das Ganze hier von Applejack narrated wird. Ich weiß nicht, dass das so spät sagt, aber erst jetzt realisiere ich das so richtig. Ich weiß, dass Lost schon seit einer Weile in Applejacks Stimme gesprochen hat, aber jetzt so ist es, ja. Es ist anders als alles andere bisher in dieser Fanfic so gesehen von der Szene her und das ist, wie gesagt, das Gute.
This was Dash's chance to truly save Equestria the right way. Dash had almost completely dismantled the orchard monster when she caught sight of something that surged exhilaration through her body. Blood. The pony who wielded this behemoth must have been at its core. Dash didn't hesitate. She took the shovel in both front hooves and pierced it completely through the center of that creature. The monster screamed in bloody agony before slumping to the ground, the rest of the flora falling away. Simultaneously, the branch barriers between the trees shriveled and dropped, opening several escape paths into the orchard. Dash was clutching her chest as she tried to steady her breath, relieved to finally be free. That was, until some branches gave way to show an orange earth mare standing proud among the trees. Her green eyes glinted in that
Endlich taucht Applejack auf.
darkness, while an evil smirk played on her lips. Dread filled Dash's mind. If I was still there, then who did she? Dash knew she shouldn't look. She
Das ist so gut einfach, so gesehen. Dass Applejack die ganze Zeit über das nur indirekt aber und jetzt da ist so gesehen das Ganze aus Applejacks Sicht. Es ist so verdammt gut einfach. Es passt einfach alles.
She knew exactly what she was gonna see when she turned around to look at the remains
Oh ja, Dings da, Mitch hat Soren getötet. Wow. Wow, einfach.
of that monster. She knew, but she also couldn't stop herself from confirming it.
No, no, no. No. No, please.
Dash turned her head to see the murderous shovel standing proud in the back of her pony prey. Their eyes were shut, tear-stained cheeks mired in mud. Hooves were splayed behind them.
Und wieder war alles nur eine Illusion. Oh Wunder.
And wings let out a final twinge before falling lifelessly on either side of the shovel's spade. Soren was gone, and it was all Dash's fault.
Ja, jetzt wird langsam die theorische Ansicht zu bestätigen, dass alles relativ eine Illusion ist, so gesehen. Außerdem bin ich gespannt, was dann die Konsequenz von all diesen Morden und so weiter sein wird. Ich glaube nicht, dass die Five danach einfach so frei noch rumlaufen können. Ich glaube es fast nicht. Eventuell werden sie ja dann auch alle weggesperrt oder irgendwas. Oder irgendwie so ein Plot-Twist-Ende wieder mal mit Twilight oder irgend sowas in der Art.
Dash whimpered, prying the weapon from her teammate's back and spraying herself in his blood. She cast the shovel aside, collapsing on the ground and giving into her violent nausea, which ripped through her in wave after wave of shock and despair. The sounds of, well, my delighted and unhinged laughter eventually pulled Dash out of her stupor. Maybe I anticipated this being the end of Dash's attempts to subdue me, but I would be wrong. Dash methodically pushed herself back to standing position and slowly reached for the bloodied shovel that she'd cast aside. She approached me, the distracted, laughing villain, keeping her hooves as silent as possible as they carefully navigated around the debris. Once she was sure of her aim, she lifted that shovel. Dash screamed, thrusting the weapon at me, who only had a few moments to avoid that attack. Although she was chagrined to see herself miss, Dash did catch a hint of shock and fear from me.
Wobei die Frage stellt sich doch noch, wenn Applejack tatsächlich, wie ich annehme, eine Illusion sein sollte und sonstiges. Warum kann sie dann innerhalb der Story selber etwas narraten? Das ist tatsächlich eine legitime Frage. Also eigentlich ist es auch möglich, dass Applejack tatsächlich da ist. Und wie gesagt, nur halt irgendwie durch dieses ganze Zeug saufen halt ihm irgendwie allen möglichen Scheiß machen kann, was natürlich auch möglich ist, aber mal sehen, was es ist. Es ist beides möglich.
I reared up and turned on my hooves, racing deeper into the orchard, but this time as prey, not predator.
Let's finish this.
Dash snarled, casually picking up the shovel and holding it aloft in her good wing. Each step she followed, she did so in confidence, one way or another. This was going to end before sunrise.
Mhm. Ja. So gehe ich davon aus, dass Part 4 höchstwahrscheinlich Rainbow Dash enthalten wird. Ja, wird es wahrscheinlich sein. Aber Gott, das war scheiße gut. Außerdem liebe ich es, wie gesagt, wieder, dass hier das Bild von jemand anderem gemacht worden ist. Das hat was. Und es ist immer noch unklar, ob Applejack tatsächlich da ist oder ob alles nur eine Illusion ist. Also es ist beides möglich und es gibt für beides Hinweise. Aber ja, meine Fresse war das gut, besonders wie wirklich gefühlt die zweite Hälfte davon nur von Applejack selber narrated wird und so weiter. Das hat was. Und das macht es scheiße gut. Also es ist noch besser als das davor und das davor war schon das Beste, was ich gefühlt jemals als MLP-Audio-Drama gesehen habe und das hier wird wahrscheinlich, das ist noch besser. Und da bin ich gespannt, wie Part 4 dann wird, weil das wird das Ganze wahrscheinlich nochmal toppen. Ja, wieder jemand, den ich kenne. Aber ich mag wirklich dieses Gimmick, dass jedes Scheißbild von jemand anderem ist. Oder größtenteils, ein paar Leute haben sicherlich was doppelt, aber ist ja auch egal. Also das war keine Dings der Vektorgrafik irgendwie mit Hintergrund, ist das so aus? Nee, das ist tatsächlich Art, Original Art, okay. Naja, wann kommt dann die nächste Episode raus? Silvester? Würde ich jetzt einfach mal spontan spekulieren, weil es wird zeitlich noch Sinn machen. Und wenn nicht, dann vielleicht das im Januar, Anfang Januar. Ich meine, mich würde sich mal wundern, wenn das Anfang Januar ist, einfach weil es ist wahrscheinlich sehr aufwendig, diese Videos zu produzieren. Ich kann, wie gesagt, mit Delays leben, also wen interessiert. Vor allem, weil es auch immer so großartig wird. Aber ja, wir stehen kurz vor dem Ende und nächstes Mal kommt wahrscheinlich raus, was wirklich passiert ist. Ich gehe wahrscheinlich davon aus, dass Applejack so gesehen getötet wird und dass wir danach dann so eine Art Plot-Twist-Ende wieder haben, wo genauer von irgendjemandem aufgeklärt wird, was wirklich passiert ist. Ja, Part 3, also 3 von 4 sind durch. Also zu 3/4 sind wir durch. Ja gut, ja klar. Lost, Goody, Mac, Applejack Lost, klar. Sweetable ist mein Medley, okay. Darin kenne ich tatsächlich Scooter Tricks. Rainbow Dash, ich hab's doch gesagt. Rainbow Dash, sehr schön. Doppelte Szenen, die gesprochen werden. Ja klar, diese Episoden brauchen wahrscheinlich aber auch nicht so viele Voice Actor, einfach weil nur ein Limited Set an Charakteren verwendet wird. Aber anyhow, wir sind durch wieder mal. Und ich freue mich auf die nächste Episode. Ah, hier beim letzten Mal war ich auch so überrascht, aber haha, ich bin in den scheiß Credits drin. Das Patreon. Ich habe doch gesagt, dass es das nächste Januar 12 Wochen. Ja, das ist ein Monat. Ganz so ein bisschen etwa. Okay, ich habe doch gesagt, dass es nicht voll, dass es Anfang des Jahres ist und wird geil. Gut. Ja, gerade wegen Noise Gate hat man es wahrscheinlich nicht gehört. Gut. Damit habe ich dann fertig, glaube ich. Wie gesagt, Fazit, das war ziemlich gut, wie alles andere in diesem Drama bisher. Und ja, ich habe nicht mehr viel zu sagen, außer dass das war dieser Stream. Wir sehen uns beim nächsten Stream wieder. Mal schauen, was das dann wird. Also es wird wahrscheinlich nicht das hier sein, es wird wahrscheinlich nicht die nächste Magic 2 Folge sein, sollte diese noch dieses Jahr rauskommen. Wenn nicht, danach keine Ahnung, was es dann wird. Also, ich habe auch keine Ahnung, was das Ganze angeht. Aber wie auch immer, ja, nächste Live-Reaction, dann wahrscheinlich der letzte Teil hiervon oder von Mensch Tragic 2 oder eventuell kommt irgendwas anderes raus, worauf ich live reagieren will, aber das könnte vielleicht sein, aber muss nicht sein. Gut. Ja. Damit habe ich dann, wie gesagt, fertig. Das war's dann mit dem Stream. Wir sehen uns dann im nächsten Stream wieder und habt noch einen schönen Tag und ein schönes Wochenende und bis zum nächsten Mal. Tschüss.